I hired a cleaning lady while my son and his wife were away on vacation. An hour later, she called in panic. Sir, someone is crying in the attic. It's not the TV. I rushed there and opened their dirty secret. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Elmer Stanley. I'm 64 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. Spent 38 years as a social worker before I retired 2 years ago. I always believed you could spot trouble in a family from a mile away, broken eye contact, nervous laughter, kids who flinch when adults move too fast. 38 years of walking into homes where things weren't what they seemed taught me to trust my instincts. But I never thought I'd need those instincts with my own son. Dennis is my only child, 36 years old now, works as a sales manager for some tech company, pulls in around $95,000 a year. Not bad for a kid who barely scraped through community college. He wasn't always this distant. I remember when he was 8, he'd wait by the window every evening, watching for my car. The second I pulled into the driveway, he'd come running out, asking about my day, telling me about his. Dad, guess what happened at school? Those words used to be my favorite part of coming home. That changed about 4 years ago when he met Trisha Parker. Now Trisha Stanley, unfortunately, she's 34, works as what she calls an Instagram influencer, which as far as I can tell means she takes pictures of herself in expensive clothes and gets paid for it somehow. She's got about 47,000 followers, always talking about their aesthetic and their brand. The first time Dennis brought her to my apartment for dinner, she spent 20 minutes photographing her plate from different angles before the food got cold. I should have seen the red flags then, but you want your kid to be happy, don't you? 4 years ago, I did something I thought was generous. I had this house on Cedar Hill Drive in the suburbs. 3 bedrooms, nice yard, nothing fancy but solid. I'd been thinking about downsizing anyway, so I transferred the deed to Dennis. Well, not exactly. I kept the property in my name, but gave them full right to live there rent-free. Call it a father's instinct, or maybe those decades in social services taught me to always keep a backup plan. Dad, this is incredible, Dennis had said when I handed him the keys. Tricia and we won't forget this. Funny how people's memories work. Since then, the calls became less frequent. First, it was every week, then every other week, then just holidays and birthdays. The invitations to visit stopped entirely about 18 months ago. We're just so busy with work, Dad, Dennis would say when I'd suggest stopping by. The house is a mess anyway. Maybe next month? Next month never came. That's why I was surprised when my phone rang on the morning of June 3rd and Dennis's name popped up on the screen. Hey, Dad, got a favor to ask, he said, skipping right past any greeting. No, how are you? No small talk. Straight to business. Sure, what do you need? Tricia and I are heading to Hawaii for 10 days, leaving tomorrow morning. The house is kind of a disaster, and we want it cleaned while we're gone. Deep cleaning, you know? Would you mind hiring someone to do it? We'll reimburse you, obviously. I paused, coffee cup halfway to my lips. In 18 months, they couldn't spare 2 hours for their father to visit, but now they needed me to arrange their cleaning service? The irony wasn't lost on me. Why can't you just hire someone yourselves? We've been so swamped getting ready for the trip, Dennis said. There was an edge to his voice, that defensive tone he'd developed over the years. It's just easier if you handle it. You're retired, you've got the time, right? I could have said no, should have said no. But when your kid asks for help, even your distant, ungrateful kid, you say yes. Fine, I'll take care of it. Great, just make sure they're thorough. Tricia wants everything spotless. Baseboards, windows, the attic, everything. I'll text you our flight details. The call ended. No thank you. No love you, Dad. Just click. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. Then I called Rosa Martinez, a woman I'd worked with years ago on a case involving a neglected home. She'd quit social work to start a cleaning business. Said it was better for her mental health. Smart woman. We'd stayed in touch, exchanged Christmas cards, that sort of thing. Rosa, It's Elmer Stanley. I need a favor." She agreed to do the job, said she could start the following morning. I gave her the address to Dennis's place and the spare key I still had from when I'd owned the house. "Just a deep clean," I told her. "They want everything done. Attic included." "No problem, Mr. Stanley. I'll take care of it." The next morning, June 4th, I drove over to Cedar Hill Drive to let Rosa in and show her around. Dennis and Tricia had already left for the airport. Probably couldn't risk running into me. The house looked the same from the outside, but inside it was different. Everything was white and gray and sterile. Tricia's aesthetic, I supposed. Photos of the two of them covered the walls. Beach vacations, restaurant dinners, hiking trips. All smiling, all perfect. Not a single picture included me. "It's a beautiful home," Rosa said politely, though I could see her taking in the cold showroom quality of it all. "It used to be," I muttered. "All right, I'll let you get to work. Call me if you need anything." I drove back to my apartment in downtown Portland, about 25 minutes in normal traffic. My place was smaller, just a one-bedroom near Lloyd District, but it was mine. No pretense, no brand, just a space where I could restore old furniture in peace, my hobby since retirement. I'd been working on a 1940s dresser I'd found at an estate sale, sanding down decades of paint to reveal the oak underneath. I'd been at it for maybe an hour when my phone rang. Rosa's name on the screen. "Mr. Stanley?" Her voice was shaking. I need you to come back here. Right now." My stomach dropped. In all the years I'd known Rosa, I'd never heard her sound like this. "What's wrong? What happened?" "There's someone on the attic. Someone crying. I thought maybe it was the TV at first, or a radio left on, but I checked. Mr. Stanley, there's someone up there. Someone real. And they're crying." The dresser, my coffee, everything else vanished from my mind. "I'm on my way. Don't go up there. Stay downstairs. I'll be there as fast as I can." I grabbed my keys and ran. I made that drive in 14 minutes. Don't ask me how. The streets of Portland blurred past. Traffic lights just suggestions. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Someone crying in the attic. In my son's house. My mind was racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. 38 years as a social worker, you see things. You walk into houses where children are kept in closets, where elderly parents are locked in basements, where the worst of humanity hides behind closed doors and drawn curtains. I told myself I was done with that world. Retired, free. But old instincts don't retire. They just wait. Rosa was standing on the front porch when I pulled up, her phone clutched in both hands. Her face was pale, eyes wide. She'd seen something that shook her, and Rosa had been in social work for 15 years before she quit. She wasn't easy to rattle. "It's still going," she said as I climbed the porch steps. "The crying. It stopped for a bit, but then it started again." I unlocked the door and we went inside. The house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and, faintly from somewhere above us, a soft, hiccuping sound. A child's crying, unmistakable once you'd heard it as many times as I had. The attic access was in the hallway ceiling, a pull-down ladder. I yanked the cord and the stairs unfolded with a creak that seemed too loud in the silence. Rosa stayed at the bottom, watching as I climbed up. The attic was dim, lit only by light filtering through a small circular window at one end. Boxes were stacked along the walls. Christmas decorations, old clothes, the accumulated junk of 4 years. The air was stale and hot, even with the ventilation, and in the far corner I saw it. An old wooden closet, the kind you'd find in a Victorian house, completely out of place up here. The crying was coming from inside it. My hands were shaking as I crossed the attic. Each step felt like it took an hour. I'd been in situations like this before, finding hidden children, discovering secrets, families kept locked away. But this was different. This was my son's house, my son's attic, my son's secret. I opened the closet door. Inside was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Thin, too thin. Her dark hair was tangled and dirty. She wore a stained pink t-shirt and shorts that were too small for her. Behind her, I could see a thin mattress on the floor, some plastic plates with food residue dried on them, a half-empty water bottle. She was pressed into the corner, knees drawn up to her chest, looking at me with huge, terrified eyes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. This was every nightmare case I'd worked on in my career, except it was happening in my own family, to a child I didn't even know existed. I crouched down slowly, making myself smaller, less threatening. Old training kicking in automatically. "Hey there," I said softly. "My name is Elmer. I'm not going to hurt you. Can you tell me your name?" She shrank back further. Her breathing was fast, panicked. "It's okay," I continued, keeping my voice gentle, steady. "I'm here to help. Are you hungry? Thirsty? I can get you something." She watched me for a long moment. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, Are you the cleaning lady's friend?" "Yes. Rosa called me. She heard you crying and got worried." "I tried to be quiet," the girl said, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. "I tried so hard, but I got scared. It's dark up here at night, and I heard noises, and I thought maybe it's all right. You don't have to be quiet anymore. What's your name, sweetheart?" Another pause. Then, "Sophie? My name is Sophie." Sophie. The name meant nothing to me. I'd never heard Dennis mention a Sophie. Never heard Tricia talk about any children. "How old are you, Sophie?" "5. I'll be 6 in August." "That's a good age. And Sophie, can you tell me, whose house is this? Who brought you here?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. "My daddy, Dennis. He said I have to stay up here while he and Tricia are gone. He said to be very quiet and not come down, and he'd be back soon. He said—" Her voice cracked. "He said I'm supposed to stay hidden because I'm not supposed to be here." The cold that had been spreading through my chest since I opened that closet door turned to ice. My daddy. Dennis. This was my granddaughter. Dennis had a daughter, had been hiding her in his attic. My granddaughter kept like a secret, like something shameful, locked away in a closet in the dark. And I'd known nothing. Nothing. "Sophie," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm, "I'm Dennis's father. That makes me your grandfather. And I promise you, you're not staying in this attic anymore." Her eyes widened. You're my grandpa?" "Yes, sweetheart, I am. And we're going to get you out of here right now." I helped her stand. She was shaky on her feet, like she hadn't walked much recently, and guided her toward the attic stairs. Rosa gasped when she saw Sophie, her hand flying to her mouth. "Call 911, I told Rosa, my voice harder than I'd intended. "Tell them we've found a child being kept in an attic. Tell them we need police and child protective services. Now." Rosa nodded and pulled out her phone, already dialing. I carried Sophie downstairs. She weighed almost nothing, and sat her on the couch. I got her water, some crackers from the kitchen. She ate like she was starving, which she probably was. While Rosa talked to the 911 operator, I sat next to Sophie, and pieces of my life rearranged themselves into a horrible new picture. My son had a daughter, had hidden her from me, from everyone, had kept her locked in an attic like she was something to be ashamed of. My son, who I'd raised to be better, to be kind, had done this. The sirens started in the distance, growing louder. Sophie flinched at the sound. "It's okay," I told her, taking her small hand in mine. "Those are the good guys. They're coming to help." She looked up at me with those big, scared eyes. Is Daddy going to be mad? I thought about Dennis on a beach in Hawaii, drinking cocktails, posting perfect photos with Tricia, while his daughter sat in darkness in an attic closet. "Don't you worry about your daddy," I said quietly. "I'll handle him." The police would be here in minutes. Child services would follow. The system I'd worked in for 38 years was about to descend on my son's perfect house, on his perfect life, and tear it all apart. And I was going to make sure it did. Officer Raymond Foster arrived first, followed 3 minutes later by a white sedan with Department of Human Services plates. I recognized the protocols immediately. The careful approach, the way Foster's eyes swept the scene, cataloging everything. The DHS caseworker was a woman in her 40s named Linda Chen, someone I'd worked with on exactly 2 cases before I retired. She recognized me instantly. Elmer Stanley? She looked confused, then concerned. What are you doing here? This is my son's house, I said. The words tasted like ash. That's my granddaughter on the couch. I didn't know she existed until an hour ago. I watched Linda's face shift through several emotions: surprise, understanding, professional detachment. She'd seen enough in this job to know that families could hide anything. We'll need your statement, she said, pulling out a tablet. Everything from the beginning, I told her. About Dennis's call requesting the cleaning service, about Rosa finding Sophie, about the closet in the attic. Linda took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Officer Foster photographed the attic, the closet, the mattress on the floor. Rosa gave her statement, her voice still shaking. Then they took Sophie to the hospital for examination. She clung to my hand when the paramedics approached with their bright smiles and gentle voices. It's okay, I told her. I'll follow right behind you. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Her voice was so small. Promise. At Portland Providence Medical Center, they ran every test imaginable. While doctors examined Sophie, I sat in the waiting room with Linda. That's when the real picture started emerging. We pulled the records, Linda said, her voice carefully neutral. Sophie Stanley. Mother deceased 2 years ago. Cancer. Father Dennis Stanley was granted full custody. No red flags in the file. 2 years. Dennis had been hiding his daughter for 2 years. Ever since Tricia came into the picture. What about child support? I asked. Linda scrolled through her tablet. Monthly payments of $1,200, paid by Dennis Stanley to an account in Sophie's name. Let me guess. He had access to that account. She looked at me sharply. How did you know? Because that's what people do when they want something to look legitimate on paper. I'd seen it a dozen times in my career. Parents setting up accounts for their kids, then draining them for personal use. Check his banking records. I'll bet you'll find withdrawals matching his own expenses. Linda made a note. We'll look into it. The doctor came out 3 hours later. Sophie was malnourished, dehydrated, showing signs of prolonged stress and isolation. No physical abuse, small mercy, but clear evidence of neglect. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation. I went in to see her. She was in a hospital bed that looked far too big for her small frame, hooked up to an IV. Her eyes were closed, but they opened when I sat down beside her. Grandpa? The word was tentative, like she was testing it out. I'm here, sweetheart. Are they going to make me go back to the attic? The question broke something in my chest. No, never. I promise you that. She was asleep again within minutes, exhausted. I sat there watching her breathe, this little girl I'd never known existed, and felt rage building like a slow fire in my bones. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold, calculated kind that plans and waits and strikes when the moment is right. My phone buzzed. Linda texting me. Initial findings support neglect claim. We're opening a formal investigation. DHS will contact you tomorrow about emergency placement options. I texted back. I want her placed with me. We'll discuss it tomorrow. I drove home near midnight. My apartment felt different, smaller, quieter. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat at my kitchen table, staring at nothing. On the shelf above my desk was a box of old work files, and on top of that box was my DHS badge from my last day on the job. They'd let me keep it as a retirement gift, laminated with retired stamped across it. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. Elmer Stanley, social worker, Department of Human Services. 38 years of walking into homes like Dennis's house, except I'd always been on the outside looking in. I'd always been the one documenting the abuse, gathering the evidence, building the case to protect children from their own parents. Now I was on the other side, the father of the abuser, the grandfather of the victim, But I still knew how the system worked. I knew the laws, the procedures, the loopholes. I knew what evidence would hold up in court and what wouldn't. I knew how to build a case that would stand against any defense attorney's challenges. And more importantly, I knew people, Linda, and others still working in the department, who remembered me, who respected me. Dennis thought he could hide his daughter from the world, hide his shame, hide his cruelty behind closed doors and perfect Instagram photos. He thought no one would ever find out. He'd made a mistake asking me to hire that cleaning service, but that was just carelessness. His real mistake was bigger than that. His real mistake was being my son, because I knew exactly who he was now, and I knew exactly what to do about it. I set the badge down and opened my laptop. Time to start doing what I did best, building a case. This time, it was personal. The next morning, I was up at 6. First call was to Linda at DHS. She answered on the second ring, already at her desk. "I want to apply for emergency kinship care," I told her. "For Sophie." There was a pause. "Elmer, you know the process." "I do know the process. I helped write parts of it, remember? Sophie is my granddaughter. I'm her closest relative, aside from Dennis, and he's under investigation for neglect. I'm a retired social worker with a clean record and a stable living situation. Emergency kinship care was designed exactly for situations like this. It still requires approval, background checks, which I'll pass. Linda, I'm not asking for favors. I'm asking to follow the proper procedures, to keep my granddaughter out of foster care while this gets sorted out. You know as well as I do that placement with family is always preferable when possible." Another pause. "I'll send you the paperwork. But Elmer, this isn't going to be simple. Dennis is her legal father. He'll fight this. Let him fight. I'll be ready." The paperwork arrived in my email within the hour. I filled it out meticulously, every line, every question. By noon, I'd submitted it back to Linda. By 3 that afternoon, she called to say the preliminary background check was clear, and they were expediting the review, given Sophie's circumstances. "She can be released to you this evening," Linda said. "Temporary placement, pending full investigation. You'll need to attend regular check-ins with DHS, and Sophie will need medical and psychological follow-ups. Whatever it takes." "Elmer," her voice softened, "I'm sorry about all of this. Not your fault, but thank you." My second call was to Charlotte Webb, a family law attorney whose name I'd gotten from a colleague years ago. Her office was downtown in one of those glass towers near Pioneer Courthouse Square. I made an appointment for that afternoon. Charlotte Webb was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and direct. Her office walls were covered with framed degrees and certificates. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "Mr. Stanley, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. What you're describing is a strong case for neglect, possibly criminal charges. But Dennis is still Sophie's legal father. If he wants to fight for custody, he can. Can he win? Not if we present the evidence properly. Medical records showing malnourishment and neglect. Testimony from the cleaning woman who found her. Police and DHS reports. The conditions she was kept in." Charlotte tapped her pen against the legal pad. "But here's what we need to aim for. Not just temporary custody for you, but permanent guardianship, and if possible, termination of Dennis's parental rights. How do we do that? We document everything, every instance of neglect, every medical finding, every financial record that shows he was using Sophie's money for himself. We build a case so airtight that no judge could possibly rule in his favor. It won't be fast, and it won't be cheap. My retainer for a case like this is $8,500, and my hourly rate is $350. I had about $70,000 in savings. It would hurt, but Sophie was worth every penny. When do we start?" Charlotte smiled. Not a warm smile, but a satisfied one. "We already have. I'll file the necessary motions tomorrow. In the meantime, I need you to gather everything you can. Photos of the attic space, copies of all DHS and police reports, Sophie's medical records once they're available. If you can get bank statements showing Dennis's misuse of her funds, that would be powerful. I know how to document a neglect case. I'm sure you do. One more thing. Dennis will lawyer up once he realizes what's happening. Be prepared for him to paint you as the problem, to claim you're overstepping, that this is a misunderstanding. He'll try to manipulate the narrative. Let him try. Charlotte studied me for a moment. You're not just doing this for Sophie's well-being, are you? This is personal. My son locked a 5-year-old child in an attic closet for months, maybe years. He stole her money. He hid her from everyone who might have helped her. Yes, it's personal. It's also right. Good. I work better with clients who aren't conflicted about their goals. She stood, extending her hand. I'll be in touch tomorrow with the initial filings. I picked up Sophie from the hospital that evening. She had a small bag of belongings, some clothes the hospital had provided, a stuffed bear from one of the nurses, and nothing else. Everything she owned in the world fit in a plastic shopping bag. On the drive to my apartment, she was quiet, staring out the window at the Portland streets. Where are we going? She finally asked. To my place. You're going to stay with me for a while. Is Daddy going to come get me? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Not right now. Right now, you're safe with me. My one-bedroom apartment suddenly seemed very small, with a 5-year-old in it. She stood in the doorway, uncertain, while I tried to figure out sleeping arrangements. The couch would have to work for me. She could have the bedroom. Are you hungry? I asked. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't hospital food? She thought about it. I don't remember. I ordered pizza, pepperoni, figuring that was a safe bet. While we waited, Sophie explored the apartment with careful, quiet steps, like she was afraid to make too much noise. She stopped at my workbench where I'd been restoring that old dresser. What's this? She asked. I fix old furniture, make it pretty again. She ran her finger along the smooth wood. It's nice. You like art? Drawing, painting, that kind of thing? A small nod. We'll get you some supplies tomorrow. Paper, crayons, whatever you want. The pizza arrived, and she ate like she was starving, which she probably was. 3 slices before she slowed down. I watched her, this little stranger who was my granddaughter, and felt the weight of what I'd taken on. I was 64 years old. I'd been looking forward to retirement, to quiet days working on furniture projects, and maybe some travel. Instead, I was about to become a full-time guardian to a traumatized 5-year-old. But when I looked at her, I didn't feel regret. I felt purpose. After dinner, I set her up in my bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed, small and lost in the space. Grandpa, she said quietly, thank you for getting me out of the attic. You don't need to thank me, Sophie. You should never have been there in the first place. Tricia said I had to stay hidden. She said I ruined everything by existing. My hands clenched into fists. I kept my voice calm. Tricia was wrong. You didn't ruin anything. You're not something to be hidden away. She looked up at me with those big eyes. Are you sure? I'm absolutely sure. Later, after she'd fallen asleep, I sat in my living room with my laptop and started planning. Charlotte was right. Documentation was everything. I made a list of everything I needed. Copies of police reports, DHS investigation records, Sophie's medical files, bank statements showing the misuse of funds. I knew which forms to request, which departments to contact, how to navigate the bureaucracy. Dennis had made a critical miscalculation. He'd hidden his daughter from the world, including me, but in doing so, he'd revealed something else, his complete lack of understanding of who his father was and what his father knew how to do. And that's when I understood exactly how to repay them for what they'd done to Sophie. 2 days after Sophie came to stay with me, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Unknown number. I answered anyway. Dad? Dennis's voice was sharp, controlled fury barely contained. What the hell did you do? So they knew. The Oregon State Police must have tracked them down in Hawaii. I pictured them getting the call on some sunny beach, fruity drinks in hand, perfect vacation interrupted by the consequences of their choices. The image was almost enough to make me smile. Good morning to you too, son. Don't play games with me. The police called us. They said Sophie was found in our house, that she's in the hospital, that you... His voice cracked, and I heard Tricia shouting something in the background. That you called CPS on us? I called 911 when I found a malnourished child locked in a closet in your attic. What did you expect me to do? She's my daughter. You had no right. I had every right. I'm her grandfather. Not that you bothered to mention her existence to me. There was a pause, and I could hear them arguing, Tricia's voice getting louder. Then Dennis was back. We're coming home. Today. And when we get there, you're giving Sophie back. She's not a borrowed car, Dennis. She's a child. And no, I'm not giving her back to the people who kept her in an attic. You can't do this. You can't just take someone's kid. I didn't take her. The state placed her with me through emergency kinship care. Everything's legal and documented, but please do come home. I'm sure the authorities would love to speak with you in person. He hung up without another word. I stood there holding the phone, feeling the cold satisfaction of that first small victory. They were cutting their vacation short, scrambling back to Portland to face what they'd done. Good. Sophie was still asleep in my bedroom. I made coffee and called Charlotte. They know, I told her. Dennis just called. They're flying back early. Expected. They'll hire an attorney and try to get emergency custody back. We need to be ready. I heard papers rustling on her end. I'm filing our motions today. Your petition for temporary guardianship and a request for a full investigation into neglect. The medical reports from the hospital are damning, Elmer. Severe malnourishment, dehydration, evidence of prolonged isolation, combined with the photographs of where she was kept. What about the financial records? Working on that. I've subpoenaed Dennis's bank statements. If we can prove he was funneling Sophie's support money into his own accounts, that's financial exploitation of a minor. In Oregon, that's a felony. How long until the hearing? 2 weeks, maybe less if we push for emergency status. I'll call you when I have a court date. The next few days fell into a strange routine. Sophie was quiet, watchful. She'd wake up panicked in the middle of the night, disoriented, and I'd have to remind her she was safe. During the day, she stayed close to me, following me from room to room like she was afraid I'd disappear. I took her shopping for clothes. She'd been living in hospital donations. At the store, she stared at the racks of children's clothing like she'd never seen anything like it. Maybe she hadn't, not in a long time. Pick whatever you want, I told her. She touched a pink dress with butterflies on it, then pulled her hand back. Tricia says pink is tacky. Tricia's not here. Do you like it? A tiny nod. Then it's yours. We filled the cart. Dresses, jeans, t-shirts, pajamas with cartoon characters, shoes that actually fit her. At the checkout, the total came to $487. I handed over my credit card without hesitation. Sophie watched the bags pile up with wide eyes. Is this all for me? She whispered. All for you, sweetheart. In the parking lot loading bags into my car, I saw a man staring at us from across the lot. For a moment, I tensed. Then I realized he was just some stranger, probably wondering why a 64-year-old man was shopping with a little girl. The world was full of judgments and assumptions. Let them wonder. 4 days after that first phone call, Dennis and Tricia returned to Portland. I knew because Dennis showed up at my apartment that evening, pounding on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Sophie froze on the couch where she'd been coloring. It's okay, I told her quietly. Stay here. I opened the door but kept the chain on. Dennis stood in the hallway looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was messy, his expensive polo shirt wrinkled. Behind him, Tricia was on her phone, probably photographing the door for her social media followers. Even now, in the middle of a crisis, she was thinking about content. I want to see my daughter, Dennis demanded. No. You can't keep her from me. I'm her father. I have rights. You had rights. You forfeited them when you locked her in an attic. Now you have a court date and a lot of explaining to do. His face went red. You self-righteous. We were going to fix up that space. Make it a proper room for her. We just needed time. 8 months. That's how long the neighbors say they've never seen a child at your house. 8 months of Sophie living in a closet while you and Tricia posted vacation photos and restaurant reviews. I leaned closer to the gap in the door. Did it ever occur to you that I spent my entire career protecting children from people exactly like you? I'm calling my lawyer, Tricia said from behind him, still filming. This is kidnapping. We're documenting everything. Document away. I've got documentation too. Hospital records, police reports, photographs of that closet. And soon I'll have your bank records showing exactly where Sophie's money went. That Tesla in your driveway wouldn't happen to have cost around $47,000, would it? Dennis's face went from red to white. Tricia's phone lowered. Get off my property, I said calmly, before I call the police and report you for harassment. This isn't over, Dennis said, but his voice had lost its edge. No, it's not. It's just beginning. See you in court, son. I closed the door. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the rush of finally confronting them. Behind me, Sophie was standing now, clutching her coloring book. Was that Daddy? Yes, but he's leaving now. Is he mad at you because of me? I knelt down to her level. Listen to me, Sophie. Your father is mad because he got caught doing something wrong. That's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Do you understand? She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Kids always blame themselves. I'd seen it 1,000 times. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I got the bank records Charlotte had subpoenaed. She'd sent them as a PDF, and I spent 2 hours going through them with the meticulous attention I'd developed in my career. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every transfer. There it was, clear as day. Monthly deposits of $1,200 into an account under Sophie's name. Child support that Dennis was legally required to pay as her custodial parent. Money that was supposed to be for her care. And monthly withdrawals, most of them for amounts matching Dennis's personal expenses, a payment to a car dealership, restaurant charges, clothing stores Tricia frequented, travel bookings. They'd been using their daughter's money as a personal ATM. I compiled everything into a spreadsheet, cross-referencing dates and amounts. Charlotte would present this in court, and there would be no talking their way out of it. The court date arrived 10 days later. The Multnomah County Courthouse was downtown, a stern concrete building that had seen thousands of family disputes play out in its courtrooms. I'd been here before, many times, sitting on the other side as a witness for the state. Today was different. Today I was the petitioner, fighting for my granddaughter. Charlotte met me in the lobby, briefcase in hand, dressed in a sharp gray suit. Ready? As I'll ever be. Dennis and Tricia are already here with their attorney. Robert Chen, decent lawyer, mostly does corporate work. He'll try to paint this as a family misunderstanding, claim you're overstepping. Don't engage with them in the hallway. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor. In the waiting area outside the courtroom, I saw them. Dennis in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Tricia in a conservative dress that looked nothing like her usual style. Someone had coached them on courtroom appearance. Their lawyer, Chen, was reviewing papers, occasionally speaking to them in low tones. Tricia saw me first. Her eyes narrowed, and she whispered something to Dennis. He turned, and for a moment our eyes met. I saw anger there, but also something else. Fear. He knew he was in trouble. We were called in at precisely 2 o'clock, Judge Sandra Pierce presiding, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. I'd appeared in her courtroom twice before, years ago. She didn't remember me, but that was fine. I wasn't looking for favors, just justice. Charlotte laid out our case methodically. The discovery of Sophie in the attic closet, the medical reports showing malnourishment and signs of prolonged neglect, Rose's testimony about finding her, the photographs of the living space, if you could call it that, a thin mattress, plastic dishes, a single overhead light bulb. Judge Pierce's expression grew harder with each piece of evidence. Chen tried his defense. Your Honor, this is a gross misrepresentation of the situation. My clients were in the process of renovating their home. The attic space was temporary while they prepared a proper bedroom for Sophie. Mr. Stanley, he gestured at me, jumped to conclusions and created this entire crisis out of a misunderstanding. Charlotte stood. If I may, Your Honor. She pulled out a thick folder. We have statements from 3 neighbors at 1840 Cedar Hill Drive. The Hendersons next door, who've lived there for 6 years. The Patel family across the street. The Johnsons 2 houses down. All 3 state they have never, not once in 8 months, seen a child at the Stanley residence. No child playing in the yard. No child being taken to school. No child visible through the windows. The Hendersons specifically note that they frequently see Mr. and Mrs. Stanley leaving for dinners and social events, always alone. She placed another document on the judge's bench. These are Sophie Stanley's medical records from Portland Providence Medical Center. The examining physician noted severe malnourishment, consistent with prolonged inadequate feeding, dehydration, vitamin deficiencies. The psychological evaluation shows signs of trauma, consistent with isolation. Dennis was pale now, his jaw clenched. Trisha's hands were clasped so tight in her lap, her knuckles were white. Chen was shuffling through papers, looking for something to counter with. Then Charlotte dropped the hammer. And finally, Your Honor, these are Mr. Dennis Stanley's bank records for the past 24 months. She held up the spreadsheet I'd prepared. Every month, Mr. Stanley deposits $1,200 into an account, ostensibly for Sophie's care, money he's required to pay as her custodial parent. And every month, that money is withdrawn and spent on personal expenses. A Tesla model, 3 for $47,000. Vacation expenses to Hawaii, Mexico, the Caribbean, high-end restaurant charges, designer clothing purchases. She turned to face Dennis directly. Mr. Stanley has been financially exploiting his daughter while keeping her in conditions that can only be described as imprisonment. Judge Pierce looked at Dennis over her glasses. Mr. Stanley, is this accurate? Have you been using your daughter's support money for personal expenses? Dennis opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, leaning in to whisper something, but Dennis shook him off. It's not. The money was there, and we had expenses, and I was going to pay it back. You were going to pay back your 5-year-old daughter? The judge's voice was ice. The daughter you kept in an attic closet? We were renovating, Tricia burst out, standing up. We were going to make her a beautiful room. This is all a huge misunderstanding. His father, she pointed at me, he's manipulating everything. He's always hated me, always thought I wasn't good enough for Dennis, and now he's using Sophie to tear our family apart. I watched her performance with detached interest. The trembling voice, the tears starting to form, the wounded innocence. She'd probably used this routine 1,000 times on social media, garnering sympathy from her followers. It might have worked there. It didn't work on Judge Pierce. Mrs. Stanley, sit down. The judge's voice cut through Tricia's dramatics like a knife. I've reviewed the photographic evidence of where this child was kept. That was not a renovation in progress. That was a closet with a mattress on the floor, used dishes, and a single light bulb. If you were planning improvements, you would have moved the child to a temporary room elsewhere in your 3-bedroom house while you worked. You didn't do that. Tricia sat down heavily, her face crumpling. The judge turned to me. Mr. Stanley, the elder Mr. Stanley, you've filed for emergency temporary guardianship? Yes, Your Honor, Charlotte answered for me. My client is Sophie's grandfather, a retired social worker with 38 years of experience in child welfare, and he has provided a safe, stable home for Sophie since she was removed from the defendant's residence. We're requesting that temporary guardianship remain with him pending a full investigation. Judge Pierce made notes on her legal pad. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of her pen. Dennis and Tricia sat frozen, waiting. Chen looked like he was calculating how to minimize the damage. Finally, the judge looked up. I'm ordering a full psychological evaluation of the minor child, Sophie Stanley, to be conducted by a court-appointed psychologist within the next 3 weeks. Temporary guardianship remains with Elmer Stanley. Mr. Dennis Stanley and Mrs. Tricia Stanley are prohibited from contact with the minor, pending the results of that evaluation and further hearings. Dennis's face went slack with shock. Tricia made a small sound, quickly stifled. Furthermore, Judge Pierce continued, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. The evidence presented today suggests possible child neglect and financial exploitation of a minor. She banged her gavel. We'll reconvene in 3 weeks for the psychological evaluation results. Court adjourned. Charlotte gathered her papers, professional and composed, but I could see the slight smile at the corner of her mouth. We'd won this round. In the hallway outside, Dennis caught up to us. Dad, please. You have to understand. I understand perfectly. I stopped walking, turned to face him fully. I understand that you had a daughter who needed you, and instead of being her father, you hid her away like something shameful. I understand that you stole from her. I understand that you chose your image, your lifestyle, your perfect little Instagram world over your own child. Tricia peered behind him, mascara running. You've ruined our lives, old man. I looked at her, really looked at her. The designer dress, the manicured nails, the face that had smiled in thousands of photos, while a little girl sat alone in the dark above her head. Your life was ruined the moment you decided that a child was disposable. I said quietly, I didn't do this. You did. I just made sure everyone could see it. We walked away, leaving them standing in the courthouse hallway. Charlotte was already on her phone, probably updating her notes. Sophie was waiting back at my apartment with a neighbor I'd hired to watch her during the hearing. That went well, Charlotte said as we reached the elevator. It's not over. No, but we're winning. The doors closed and I leaned against the elevator wall, suddenly exhausted. Winning. Yes, we were winning. But it didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like the beginning of something longer, harder. Still, when I thought about Tricia's face when the judge ordered them to stay away from Sophie, when I remembered Dennis's shock at having his financial exploitation laid bare in open court, I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. They'd underestimated me, thought I was just a retired old man who'd roll over and accept their version of events. They were learning otherwise. The court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Helen Morales, came to my apartment a week after the hearing. She was in her late 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Sophie at ease. Over the next 10 days, she met with Sophie 5 times, playing games, drawing, talking in that careful way psychologists have that makes children feel safe enough to share their truth. I stayed out of the sessions, giving them privacy, but I could hear Sophie's voice sometimes through the door, small, hesitant, sometimes crying. Each sound was a knife in my chest, but also ammunition. Every tear, every fearful word, every traumatic memory was another nail in Dennis and Tricia's coffin. Dr. Morales gave me a preliminary update after the 3rd session. Mr. Stanley, I need to be frank with you. What this child has experienced, it's severe. The isolation, the neglect, the emotional abandonment. She's going to need extensive therapy. Whatever she needs, she'll get. The final report will be ready for the next hearing. But I want you to know, Sophie feels safe with you. That's significant. In all my sessions with her, when she talks about you, there's no fear, only trust. That meant more to me than any court victory could. The second hearing was scheduled for 10 days later. During that time, Charlotte and I gathered more evidence. She'd gotten security camera footage from Dennis's neighbors, the kind of smart doorbell cameras that record everything. We went through hours of footage, documenting every time Dennis and Tricia left the house. Dinner dates, shopping trips, morning jogs. Always alone, never with a child. Charlotte also subpoenaed their credit card statements. The spending patterns were damning. Over 2 years, they'd spent $34,000 on restaurants, $23,000 on travel, $18,000 on clothing. most of it from stores Tricia frequented. Meanwhile, there were no purchases for children's items, no toy stores, no children's clothing, no pediatrician visits beyond the legally required minimum. They pretended she didn't exist, Charlotte said, reviewing the documents, and they funded that lifestyle with her money. The hearing arrived like a reckoning. This time the courtroom was more crowded. Word had gotten out, probably through Tricia's social media, where she'd been posting vague references to family struggles and being persecuted. A few reporters sat in the back row, notebooks ready. Judge Pierce called the court to order, and Charlotte stood to present our case. She started with Dr. Morales' psychological evaluation, entering it into evidence. The report was 37 pages long, dense with clinical observations and diagnoses. Charlotte read key excerpts aloud. Sophie Stanley presents with symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, including hypervigilance, nightmares, and extreme anxiety when separated from her current guardian. She demonstrates social anxiety disorder and shows significant delays in speech development for her age. The child exhibits behavioral patterns typical of prolonged emotional and physical neglect. Judge Pierce was reading along on her copy, her expression growing grimmer with each page. Charlotte continued, Dr. Morales concludes, and I quote, "This child has experienced systematic isolation and deprivation. Her conditions of confinement, living in an attic closet with minimal human contact, inadequate nutrition, and no educational or social stimulation, constitute severe abuse. The psychological damage is profound and will require years of intensive therapeutic intervention." I watched Dennis from across the courtroom. His face had gone pale, that expensive tan from Hawaii, now looking sallow under the fluorescent lights. Tricia was staring at her hands, tears running down her face, but I noticed she'd positioned herself where the reporters could see her crying, still performing, even now. Then Charlotte brought out the security footage. She'd edited it into a compilation, Dennis and Tricia leaving their house on different dates and times over 8 months. The timestamps were visible: morning, afternoon, evening, weekend brunches, weeknight dinners. Always just the two of them. The video played on a screen set up in the courtroom, silent and damning. "Your Honor," Charlotte said, "this footage covers an 8-month period. Not once do we see Sophie Stanley leave that house. Not for school, not for play, not for medical appointments, not for anything. While her father and stepmother lived their lives freely, this 5-year-old child remained confined to an attic." Chen, Dennis's lawyer, tried to object. "Your Honor, the absence of evidence isn't evidence of—" "Counselor," Judge Pierce cut him off. "I've seen enough. Continue, Ms. Webb." Charlotte presented the financial records next, the credit card statements showing lavish spending while Sophie went without basic necessities. She had receipts for everything: Dennis's Tesla purchased with funds from Sophie's account, luxury vacations charged to cards in his name, designer purchases from Tricia's favorite boutiques. Mr. Dennis Stanley was receiving $1,200 monthly in child support, money intended for Sophie's care. Our forensic accountant has traced these funds through his various accounts. They were consistently diverted to personal expenses. Over 24 months, approximately $28,800 was misappropriated. Judge Pierce looked at Dennis. "Mr. Stanley, do you dispute these findings?" Chen whispered urgently to Dennis, who shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "Did you use money designated for your daughter's care for personal expenses?" A long pause. "Yes." "While she lived in an attic closet?" Dennis's voice was barely audible. "Yes." The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing, just watching this confession unfold. Charlotte took a breath. "Your Honor, given the severity of the abuse, the systematic nature of the neglect, and the financial exploitation, we are requesting 2 things. First, permanent guardianship of Sophie Stanley be granted to Elmer Stanley. Second, we request that this court recommend termination of Dennis Stanley's parental rights." Tricia stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly. You can't do that. He's her father. She needs her father. She needed her father when she was locked in your attic, I said, my voice carrying across the courtroom. I hadn't planned to speak, but the words came out anyway. She needed her father when she was hungry and alone and scared. Where were you then? On a beach in Maui? Mr. Stanley, Judge Pierce said, but her tone wasn't reproachful. Please. I sat back down, but I caught the slight nod she gave me. She understood. Judge Pierce reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked up. I'm granting permanent temporary guardianship to Elmer Stanley, pending final resolution of custody. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The evidence presented today suggests multiple charges, including child neglect, child endangerment, and financial exploitation of a minor. Dennis made a sound, a choked gasp. Tricia grabbed his arm. Criminal charges? Chen was on his feet. Your Honor, my clients have never been in trouble with the law. Your clients kept a child in an attic closet and stole her money. The state of Oregon takes such matters very seriously. Judge Pierce's voice was steel. The district attorney will determine what charges are appropriate. This court will reconvene once the criminal proceedings are resolved, to make a final determination on parental rights. She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. In the hallway afterward, Dennis tried to approach me, but there were reporters between us now, shouting questions. I saw him mouth something, maybe Dad or maybe please, but I turned away. Charlotte guided me toward the exit, her hand on my elbow. That went better than expected, she said quietly. Is it over? The custody battle? Almost. The criminal case? That's just beginning. The district attorney moved fast. 2 weeks after the hearing, Dennis and Tricia were formally charged. Child neglect in the first degree, a Class A misdemeanor. Child endangerment, a Class C felony. Financial exploitation of a minor, a Class C felony. Each charge carried serious penalties. They were arrested on a Tuesday morning. I heard about it from Charlotte, who'd been monitoring the case. Dennis posted bail within hours, $50,000 cash bond. Tricia's bail was the same. They both walked out of the Multnomah County Detention Center by late afternoon, but the damage was done. The local news picked up the story that evening. Local tech manager and Instagram influencer charged in child neglect case. They showed Dennis's LinkedIn photo next to Tricia's perfectly curated Instagram profile, then cut to footage of the courthouse. The contrast was stark, their polished public images next to the reality of what they'd done. I watched the news coverage from my living room while Sophie colored at her new desk. I'd bought her an art table with storage for all her supplies. She was drawing a picture of a house with flowers in the yard, a normal child's drawing, something she probably hadn't been allowed to do in years. Grandpa, can we plant real flowers? She asked, not looking up from her crayons. We can plant a whole garden if you want. She smiled. Those smiles were getting more frequent, less tentative. Progress. The next few weeks were chaos for Dennis and Tricia, and I watched it unfold with a satisfaction I didn't try to hide. Dennis's employer, a major tech company in Portland, put him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the case. 3 days later, they announced he'd been separated from the company. Fired, in other words. Tech companies don't keep employees charged with child abuse on the payroll. Tricia's Instagram empire collapsed even faster. Her followers started dropping by the thousands. Sponsors pulled their contracts. A clothing brand she'd partnered with issued a statement. We do not associate with individuals charged with crimes against children. Within 2 weeks, her follower count had plummeted from 47,000 to about 4,200. And most of those were probably just people who hadn't heard the news yet or were following to watch the disaster unfold. She tried to fight back, posting a long, tearful video explaining that this was all a misunderstanding, that her father-in-law was manipulating the legal system, that she and Dennis were victims of false accusations. The comments section destroyed her. People posted screenshots of the news articles, links to court documents, photos of the attic closet that had somehow leaked online. One comment stayed with me. You kept a child in a closet while posting pictures of your perfect life. That's not a misunderstanding. That's evil. The video was deleted within a day. They tried other tactics. Dennis called me twice, blocked both times. Tricia sent emails through her lawyer, suggesting we work something out privately to avoid the criminal trial. Charlotte responded with a single line. Our client has no interest in negotiating. See you in court. Then they went public with their counterattack. Dennis gave an interview to a local news station, claiming I'd kidnapped Sophie, that I'd poisoned the court against them, that they'd been planning to give Sophie her own room, and I'd overreacted. He painted himself as a struggling father dealing with a difficult family situation, and me as an interfering old man with a grudge. The interview aired on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, it had been thoroughly fact-checked and debunked by multiple journalists who'd actually read the court documents. One reporter wrote, Mr. Stanley's claims don't match the evidence. Medical reports show his daughter was severely malnourished. Bank records show he spent her support money on personal luxuries. His own attorney admitted in court that Sophie lived in the attic space. This isn't a family dispute. It's a criminal case, and the evidence speaks for itself. Their lawyer, Chen, recommended a plea deal. I know because Charlotte told me. She'd been in communication with the prosecutor's office. They want to plead guilty to reduce charges, she said. Avoid a trial, get lighter sentences. What's the DA saying? She's willing to negotiate, but not by much. They committed serious crimes, Elmer. The evidence is overwhelming. Even with a plea deal, they're looking at jail time. Good. The plea negotiations took weeks. During that time, Sophie's therapy continued. Twice a week, Dr. Morales worked with her, slowly helping her process what had happened. I saw changes, small ones at first. She started sleeping through the night without nightmares. She laughed more. She made a friend at the library during story time. One evening she looked up from her coloring and said, Grandpa, am I going to live with you forever? As long as you want to, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. In mid-August, Dennis and Tricia accepted the plea deal. They would plead guilty to child neglect, a Class A misdemeanor, and financial exploitation of a minor, a Class C felony. In exchange, the child endangerment charge would be dropped. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a month later. I received the notification from Charlotte via email. Short, professional, to the point. They've accepted the plea agreement, sentencing hearing scheduled for September 15th. Both defendants will allocute, formally admit guilt, before the judge. I read it twice, then set my phone down. Sophie was in the kitchen, carefully arranging cookies on a plate. We'd baked them together that afternoon, following a recipe we'd found online. Chocolate chip, slightly burnt on the edges because we'd been talking and lost track of time. Perfect. They were going to stand in court and admit what they'd done. Admit that they'd neglected their daughter. Admit that they'd stolen from her. No more excuses, no more stories about misunderstandings or renovations. Just the truth, finally, spoken out loud in a court of law. I walked into the kitchen and wrapped Sophie in a hug. She hugged me back, her small arms tight around my waist. Are you okay, Grandpa? She asked, muffled against my shirt. I'm perfect, I said. And for the first time in months, I meant it. The sentencing hearing was set for mid-September, 6 weeks after they'd accepted the plea deal. During those weeks, life with Sophie settled into something resembling normalcy. She started kindergarten at a nearby school, her first time in a classroom with other children. The teacher called me after the first week to say Sophie was adjusting well, but clearly needs time to catch up socially. I knew that already, but hearing someone else recognize it, someone who cared about helping her, felt like progress. Sophie made her first friend, a little boy named Marcus, who shared his crayons with her during art time. She came home excited, talking about Marcus's dinosaur backpack and how they'd built a tower with blocks. These were things normal 5-year-olds did, things Sophie should have been doing all along. Every small milestone felt like another victory over what Dennis and Tricia had stolen from her. Charlotte called me the week before sentencing. The prosecutor wants to know if you'd like to give a victim impact statement. You're Sophie's guardian, so you can speak on her behalf about how their actions affected her. I thought about it. Thought about standing in that courtroom, looking Dennis in the eye and telling the judge exactly what his choices had cost his daughter. Yes, I'll do it. I spent 2 days writing that statement, revising it, cutting unnecessary words, making sure every sentence counted. I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. The day of sentencing arrived with gray skies threatening rain. Sophie stayed home with the same neighbor who'd watched her during previous hearings, a retired teacher named Mrs. Patterson, who'd become something of a grandmother figure herself. As I left, Sophie hugged me tight. "Will Daddy be there?" she asked quietly. "Yes, but he can't hurt you anymore, I promise." The courtroom was packed, more reporters than before filling the back rows. Dennis and Tricia sat at the defense table with Chen, both dressed conservatively, trying to look remorseful. Tricia's Instagram-ready makeup was gone, replaced with a bare face that looked younger and more vulnerable. Calculated, probably, their lawyer's advice. Judge Pierce entered, and we all stood. When we sat again, the weight of what was about to happen settled over the room like a physical presence. The prosecutor went first, outlining the charges they'd pled guilty to and the recommended sentences. Then it was time for impact statements. I stood, walked to the podium, and looked at the judge. Then I looked at Dennis. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "I've spent 38 years as a social worker protecting children from abuse and neglect. I've seen terrible things, homes where children were beaten, starved, abandoned. But I never imagined I'd find my own granddaughter living in conditions I'd spent my career fighting against." I glanced down at my written statement, but I didn't really need it. These words were burned into my memory. Sophie Stanley is 5 years old. When I found her, she weighed 38 pounds, severely underweight for her age. She was living in a closet in an attic with a thin mattress, dirty dishes, and minimal food. She'd been isolated from other children, from education, from basic human interaction for months. Her father and stepmother kept her hidden like a shameful secret, while they spent her support money on vacations and luxury items. Tricia was crying now, her shoulders shaking. I didn't care. The psychological damage may never fully heal. Sophie has PTSD. She wakes up screaming from nightmares. She's afraid of the dark, afraid of being alone, afraid that any moment someone might lock her away again. She's in therapy twice a week, learning how to be a normal child, something that should come naturally, but doesn't for her anymore. Dennis's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. Good. Feel it. Feel every word. But here's what I want the court to understand. Despite everything they did to her, Sophie is surviving. She's learning to trust again. She's making friends. She's laughing. And she's doing all of that because she's away from the people who hurt her. The best thing that ever happened to Sophie Stanley was being found. And the best thing for her future is ensuring that those who neglected her face real consequences. I looked directly at Dennis. My son made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. I sat down. The courtroom was silent except for Tricia's muffled crying. Chen tried to speak in their defense, talked about how Dennis and Tricia were good people who made mistakes, how they were truly remorseful, how they'd learned from this experience. It rang hollow against the evidence. Judge Pierce listened without expression. When Chen finished, she reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked up at Dennis and Tricia. "Mr. Stanley, Mrs. Stanley, please stand." They stood, Tricia gripping Dennis's arm for support. "I've reviewed all the evidence in this case. The medical reports, the financial records, the psychological evaluations. I've read the victim impact statement, and I've considered your guilty pleas." Judge Pierce's voice was iron. "What you did to this child was systematic, calculated, and cruel. You didn't make a mistake. You made a series of conscious choices over many months to neglect, isolate, and financially exploit a vulnerable child in your care. Dennis's face had gone chalk white. Mr. Dennis Stanley, for the crime of child neglect in the first degree, I sentence you to the maximum allowed, 12 months in county jail. For financial exploitation of a minor, I sentence you to 18 months in state prison to run consecutively. Total sentence, 30 months incarceration with possibility of early release after serving 18 months. Upon release, you will serve 5 years of supervised probation. 30 months, 2.5 years. Dennis swayed slightly, and Chen grabbed his elbow. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm terminating your parental rights to Sophie Stanley, effective immediately. You will have no custody, no visitation, no contact whatsoever. A permanent restraining order will be issued prohibiting you from coming within 500 feet of the child. Dennis made a sound, a choked gasp that might have been a sob. Mrs. Tricia Stanley, for child neglect in the first degree, I sentence you to 12 months in county jail. For financial exploitation of a minor, I sentence you to an additional 12 months, consecutive. Total sentence, 24 months with possibility of early release after 12 months. 3 years supervised probation upon release. Tricia was openly crying now, mascara running despite the minimal makeup. Both of you are prohibited from working with children in any capacity for the rest of your lives. You will repay the misappropriated funds, $28,800, to a trust account for Sophie Stanley, plus $14,200 in legal fees to Mr. Elmer Stanley. Failure to repay will result in additional civil penalties. The judge's gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. Bailiff, take them into custody. Dennis turned to me as the bailiffs approached. His face was a mess of emotions, rage, disbelief, desperation. Dad, please, you have to stop this. Tell them. Tell them what? My voice was quiet, but it carried. Tell them you're a good father? You're not. Tell them this is unfair? It's justice. Tell them I should forgive you? I stood up, looked him in the eye. I forgave you for a lot of things over the years, Dennis. For being selfish, for being distant, for choosing Tricia over family. But this? Locking the child in an attic. Stealing from her? That's beyond forgiveness. I'm your son, his voice cracked. You were my son. Now you're just the man who abused my granddaughter. There's a difference. The bailiffs moved him toward the door that led to the holding cells. Tricia was already gone, still crying. Dennis looked back one more time, his face the picture of defeat and disbelief, and then he disappeared through the door. The courtroom began to empty. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Charlotte packed up her briefcase, professional satisfaction evident in the set of her shoulders. I sat alone for a moment in the quiet courtroom, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle over me. My son was going to prison. My granddaughter was safe. Justice had been served. It should have felt like victory. And it did. But there was something else, too. Not quite sadness, but a recognition of how much had been broken that could never be fixed. Dennis and I would never have a normal father-son relationship again. Sophie would grow up knowing her father had hurt her. Some things, once shattered, stay shattered. But Sophie would also grow up safe, loved, and free. And that was worth everything else. The final custody hearing took place 6 weeks later in late October. The leaves on the trees lining the courthouse were gold and red, autumn in full swing. Sophie and I had spent the morning at the park before the hearing, and she'd collected leaves to press in a book, a project her kindergarten teacher had suggested. "Grandpa, will the judge lady be nice today?" she asked as we drove downtown. "Judge Pierce is always fair, sweetheart, and today she's going to make sure you stay with me forever. Forever, ever. Forever, ever." Charlotte met us in the lobby. She knelt down to Sophie's level. "Hi, Sophie. Remember me?" Sophie nodded shyly, hiding partially behind my leg. "You don't have to come into the courtroom if you don't want to, but the judge might want to say hello to you." "Okay," Sophie whispered. The hearing was simpler than the others. With Dennis's parental rights already terminated as part of his sentence, this was really just a formality, converting my temporary guardianship into permanent legal custody. But I wanted it done right, wanted it official, wanted every piece of paperwork filed correctly so that no one could ever question Sophie's place in my life. Judge Pierce reviewed the case file, the reports from DHS showing Sophie's progress in my care, the psychological evaluations showing her improvement with therapy. Dr. Morales had submitted an updated assessment, noting that while Sophie still struggled with trauma, she was thriving in a stable, loving environment with her grandfather. "Mr. Stanley," Judge Pierce said, looking at me over her reading glasses, "you've attended every required check-in with DHS. Sophie's medical and therapeutic needs are being met. Her school reports are positive. By all accounts, you've provided her with a safe, nurturing home." "She deserves nothing less, Your Honor." "Indeed." The judge signed a document with a flourish, then looked up. "Guardianship of Sophie Stanley is hereby granted permanently to Elmer Stanley. Mr. Stanley, you are now her legal guardian, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Congratulations." The gavel came down, and it was done. Permanent, irrevocable. Sophie was mine, and I was hers. Charlotte shook my hand, smiling. "That's it. You're officially her guardian. No one can challenge this now." We left the courtroom, and I found Sophie waiting with Mrs. Patterson in the hallway. I picked her up. She was getting bigger already, gaining weight, growing stronger, and held her close. "It's official, sweetheart. You're stuck with me." She giggled, the sound pure and bright. "Good. I like being stuck with you." Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I'm so happy for both of you." The next week, I put the house on Cedar Hill Drive up for sale. I'd been planning this since the first hearing, waiting for the right moment. The house sold in 4 days. Portland real estate market was hot, for $487,000. I'd bought it 12 years ago for $340,000. So even after realtor fees and closing costs, I walked away with a significant profit. Every penny went onto a trust fund for Sophie's future, college or trade school or whatever she wanted to pursue. It was her money, protected legally so that no one, not even me, could touch it without her benefit in mind. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dennis had stolen from his daughter's account to fund his lifestyle. I was putting everything I could into her future. We'd both made our choices about what kind of men we wanted to be. In November, nearly 6 months after finding Sophie in that attic, we fell into our rhythm. Sophie went to school every weekday. I'd pack her lunch. She liked peanut butter and jelly with the crusts cut off, and walk her to the bus stop. After school, we'd do homework together at the kitchen table. Then I'd make dinner while she drew or played with the toys that now filled what used to be my living room. Twice a week, Dr. Morales continued therapy sessions. The nightmares were less frequent now. Sophie still had bad days, moments when something would trigger a memory and she'd shut down, but they were becoming rarer. She'd made 3 friends at school: Marcus with the dinosaur backpack, a girl named Lily who loved art as much as Sophie did, and another girl named Zoe who was teaching Sophie how to jump rope. Normal kid things, the life she should have had all along. One evening in late October, we went to the park near my apartment, the same park where Sophie had been too scared to play on the swings that first week. Now she ran ahead of me, fearless, heading straight for the playground. "Grandpa, watch!" she called, climbing to the top of the slide. I watched her slide down, laughing, her hair flying behind her. She ran back around to do it again and again, tireless in that way only young children can be. I sat on a bench, watching her play. Around us, other families were doing the same. Parents with toddlers, older kids playing tag, teenagers on their phones pretending they were too cool for parks, but secretly enjoying the last warm day before winter really set in. An elderly woman on the next bench over smiled at me. "Your granddaughter?" "Yes, she's 5. Beautiful child. You're lucky." "I am," I agreed, though luck had nothing to do with it. This wasn't luck. This was choice, action, and consequences. Sophie was safe because I'd fought for her, because I'd known the system and used it, because I'd refused to let Dennis and Tricia continue their abuse. Sophie ran up to me, breathing hard from playing. "Can we get ice cream? It's almost dinner time. Please? Just a little one?" I pretended to consider it seriously. "Well, I suppose since you did all your homework without complaining today." "Yes!" She pumped her fist in victory, and we walked to the ice cream shop 2 blocks away. She got chocolate chip in a cone, managed to eat most of it before it melted everywhere, and we walked home with sticky hands and full hearts. That night, after her bath and bedtime story, Sophie looked up at me from her bed, the bed in what used to be my office, now transformed into a proper little girl's room with pink walls and butterfly decorations, and all her drawings taped up proudly. "Grandpa, what happened to Daddy and Tricia?" I'd been waiting for this question, knew it would come eventually. They're in a place where people go when they've done something wrong. They have to stay there for a while to think about what they did. Will they come back? Not to us. They can't come near you anymore. The judge made sure of that. She absorbed this quietly. Then, I'm glad I live with you. I'm glad you live with me too, sweetheart. Do you think... She hesitated. Do you think I'm bad? Because of what happened? I sat on the edge of her bed, took her small hand in mine. Listened to me very carefully. Nothing that happened was your fault. Nothing. You are good and brave and strong. What your father and Tricia did was wrong. But you? You're perfect exactly as you are. She smiled, sleepy now. Love you, Grandpa. Love you too, Sophie. I turned out the light and left her door cracked open. She still didn't like complete darkness. In the living room, I sat at my small desk and opened my laptop. There was an email from Charlotte with the final documentation of the trust fund, now officially established and funded. Sophie's future was secure. I looked around my apartment. It was smaller than it used to feel, crowded now with Sophie's things. Her backpack by the door, her shoes in a little row, her artwork covering the refrigerator. It was messy and loud and completely different from the quiet retirement I'd imagined. I wouldn't change a single thing. Outside my window, Portland glittered in the evening light. Somewhere in a county jail, Tricia was serving her sentence. Somewhere in a state prison, Dennis was learning what it meant to face real consequences for his actions. Their perfect Instagram life was gone, replaced by the reality they'd created. And here, in a one-bedroom apartment that had become a home, a little girl slept safely in her bed, dreaming whatever dreams 5-year-olds dream, protected and loved. I'd spent 38 years fighting for children I didn't know. Turns out the most important fight was for the one I did. Justice wasn't always swift. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. A grandfather and granddaughter building a life together from the wreckage of betrayal. But it was justice all the same, and that was enough. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.
한번 감기요? 네, 그렇게 어제 좀 열나고 그래서 감기약, 종합감기약 하나 먹고 잤는데 괜찮았어요. 근데 원래 안나는 어제부터 좀 몸이 계속 안 좋다고 했었어가지고 그리고 어제 힘들었어요, 솔직히 말해서. 접시당 100개. 아프대. 원래 몸이 안 좋은 친구라서 그런가?